What is up, guys? It is that time. The MLB Strategy Show, going to go game by game for everything you need to know for today's 9-game MLB main slate, bright and early on a Monday here on the West Coast. I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who is always the best face for me to see when starting a work week. You know him, you love him. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a morning person than Spags. I feel like I have a little more energy, but also, it's 3 hours later for me than it is for him. So yeah, in the morning for me, I always see you, and it's always like, oh, Spags always seems a little tired, maybe a little hungover, a little groggy, and me, I'm just ready to go.
No, you are helping me get where I need to be. And another thing that helps me get where I need to be for my MLB lineups is our Awesemo Plus data packages, which you can get for yourself. If you go to awesemo.com/join, because we have tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95, which includes full access to all the premium content and tools on awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much more. If you're only looking to play MLB DFS, you can sign up for an Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package for only $15.95. So stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. And of course, this strategy show will be live on the Awesemo Podcast Network. So anytime you're not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows on YouTube, make sure to go to awesemo.com/podcast, because the vast majority of them, besides the live before locks and deeper dives, those are all on there. So make sure to go check those out. You also have a free way to win a week, or is it a week? Yeah, free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum if you go and leave a 5-star review with your Twitter handle or email address included on any of the podcasts at awesemo.com/podcast. There's 1 year those entries that you guys put in there will be allowed to win. So go in there, try to win some free weeks of Awesemo Plus, really get all the podcast forms of these shows that you need to hear about with any sort of shelf life. But Greg, let's talk about the slate real fast, because we do have, I guess, an overview maybe you could provide. And you mentioned before we came on the show, as I was looking at the Yankees lineup and going, wow, they're really good hitters, because that's the kind of analysis I'm ready to bring at 8 a.m. on the West Coast. But any overarching thoughts, Greg, I guess, besides, or maybe including the Yankees being the chalk team of the slate by a fairly wide margin?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, right? Because the Yankees do have a lot of good hitters in their lineup, obviously, but they've been fairly not good so far this year. So working with double screens here, but the Yankees so far against right-handed pitching this year, they've an 86 WRC plus as a team. If you look at the players' numbers past this year, they have a bunch of really good hitters. It should be a really good offense going forward. And they're going up against Matt Harvey, who's been terrible for a very, very long period of time now. But by the same merit, the Yankees also are ridiculously highly owned, which is going to cause some uncomfortable decisions for me.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot to talk about with this first game that we have coming up here. And something in the chat requesting Kevin Smith saying, do KC game, please. I like that we're getting requests here as though we are a cover band at a bar, but that game's on the main slate. Greg, I don't know if you have any overarching thoughts about Kansas City here for Kevin Smith, but we're really focused on the main slate with 9 games to get into.
So, it's funny. The other day we got the request for the 2-game slate, and at least then I was like, you know what, I could look into this 2-game slate really quick. But for a 1-game showdown slate, I'm sorry, it's not something I really prepped for ahead of time. Let me look at
play Salvador Perez. That's going to be my suggestion.
I was going to make up some advice to give looking over, but I don't know. I didn't look at it. If you really want information, DM me on Twitter, and then I'll look through our projections after the show's over.
Yeah, I respect anybody grinding those other slates, but with a 9-gamer, you got to focus on where your bread is buttered. And that is going to be the main slate today. It starts at 7:05 Eastern time, and let's go into the first game. The Yankees getting 5.2 implied runs against Matt Harvey, a pitcher who very easy to target against in a variety of ways. On the other side, Baltimore 4.3 implied runs against Davy Garcia. But let's talk about the Yankees and Matt Harvey. And Matt Harvey, the numbers for him, anytime I talk about him on a show, they just jump out in a way that is going to be unique to Matt Harvey and his experience in Major League Baseball. But over the last couple of years, going back to 2019, gives up a 302 batting average, a 248 ISO. Over the last season and change, batting average has gotten worse. A 354 batting average allowed after facing 153 batters, not the biggest sample size. 4.8 xFIP, maybe he's been better than it seems, and a little unlucky with a 390 BABIP. But point being, Matt Harvey, the pitcher, Greg, that we always like to target against when he's on a slate, and in the spot against the Yankees, I guess the question I would have, would you play any Matt Harvey at 0.1% ownership?
No, not even in consideration. The real question here for me, though, and by the way, Matt Harvey has been terrible for a few years now. Even if we say that he's gotten lucky, oh, look at how high his batting average on balls in play. It's yeah, because he gets hit really hard. He can't get major league hitters out, but he just kind of sticks in the league. I guess because of his success with the Mets like 8 years ago now. Been a very long time since he's been an effective pitcher. He had the thoracic outlet surgery, which very much diminished his overall ability as a pitcher. The Yankees have the best odds of being the highest scoring team on the slate by a little bit of a margin, but they're also the highest owned team by a really wide margin also. So here's where it becomes tough for me. The Yankees in our top stacks will they have 14% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but they're also getting owned at a 23% clip. So being realistic on a slate that is 9 games, there's 18 teams in play. There is not one team that is a 25% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate. So with that in mind, I have to go underweight to the field on the Yankees and favor some other lower owned stacks relative to their ownership. I'm going to be getting to a bunch of Yankees guys as one-offs because I think a lot of them have home run upside. But in terms of 5-man Yankee stacks, I'm going to be very underweight to the field. I'm not comfortable with it, except I think that is what I have to do just based on my process and what the numbers bear out, because the odds of them being the top stack is nowhere near what their ownership is.
Yeah, they're almost about double the chance of being, or double the chance of their ownership compared to their top stack potential. And on the other side, I have to say, for Matt Harvey's credit, it wouldn't shock me running an optimization that you get a little bit of Matt Harvey, just because he projects to be about a 2x value. And he also has a 16% chance of being the top value pitcher on the slate with only that 0.1% ownership. And I'm not saying Matt Harvey's a good play, but I think as if you are playing 150 lineups, I wouldn't be shell shocked if I got a little bit of Matt Harvey, just because that's your most direct leverage point you're going to have on the slate. But I agree with you for the most part here. Playing Matt Harvey doesn't seem the most appealing, and playing the Yankees too, just a fine team, really no bad hitters to point to. I guess the one guy you could say a bit underqualified to be a Rougned Odor in the 9 hole, who's only got a 67 WRC plus, but every other guy here over a 100 WRC plus. So they're creating runs at least commensurate with league average or a little bit above that. I think, is there any one guy, Greg, I guess if you are going to play the Yankees, that you can get different with? Because I don't mind taking lower in the order hitters, obviously a lower probability, but taking the value with a Clint Frazier projected to hit in the 8 hole, I don't mind going to. He's really the only single digit owned guy on DraftKings though. So to me, there isn't a whole lot of ways to get different, but that is one.
I mean, all of them are at least somewhat popular. Like the guys that actually have power upside, right? Like the guy that I'm getting to the most in my Yankee stacks right now is Giancarlo Stanton. He's been hitting the ball really well lately. We know he hits a lot of homers. Oh, he didn't homer in the last 2 games, but 3 games ago he did hit a pair of homers. He tends to hit a lot of homers and bunches. There's nobody in the league with more power than him at only a 4,900 price tag on DraftKings, and then on Fanduel, I think he's a little bit more appropriately priced. 3,600 for Stanton on Fanduel. That's a little cheap for him also. He's the guy that's popping up the most meaningfully for me from the Yankees, and it's not because he's low owned, but it really just has to do with the power upside more than anything, because I think there's a chance the Yankees could score, 5 or 6 runs and be overall pretty solid as a team, not be the top scoring team on the slate and just hit, 2 or 3 solo homers. And I think that Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton are the 2 most likely guys to do that. And for the price tag, Stanton on DraftKings and then both Stanton and Judge on FanDuel as a one-off plays are a good way to get some exposure to the Yankees while maybe not stacking them entirely.
Also, I'm surprised to see this number, but I need to pull together the sample size here. But Gleyber Torres kind of fallen off the cliff over the last season and change, down to a 230 batting average and a 0.090 ISO and only a 1% home run rate. And he's going to be 20% owned. I think that to me is one other way I might get different, because he's going to be so highly owned, is maybe trying to trust the shorter term sample size of Gleyber Torres and not take him in a stack. I don't know if you have any sort of thoughts. I saw you nodding your head, Greg, but do you have any feel here for Gleyber and kind of, again, falling off of the cliff in a way that's kind of surprising to see?
Yeah, so my initial builds, which, they're never like lineups that I'm entering where it's not like, 11 a.m. my time. It's like, all right, 8 hours before the slate starts, like my lineups are done and ready to go, except I do, at least for the purpose of the show, I get up in the morning, I do a build, and it's kind of like, all right, based on the information I have now for baseball, and this is a little easier to do for baseball and basketball if I'm doing a morning basketball show, but kind of like this is about what my exposures would be to everybody if the slate were to lock now. And I only have Gleyber Torres in 3% of my lineups right now. And a big part of it is, like you said, he's very popular and he's not played well so far this year. And kind of as a funny time, my brother's really into buying and selling baseball cards. And he brings up to me all the time that nobody has dropped in value in the baseball card market more than Gleyber Torres over the last couple of years. So a lot of that, it goes hand in hand just to where he looks like one of the best young middle infield prospects in baseball a couple of years ago. And while I still think he has a lot of promise, he's definitely fallen off in a pretty big way as of late.
Yeah, so definitely one way to get different there, and it just jumped out to me while looking through it. But you are going to be playing a very highly owned Yankee stack no matter what the way. On the other side, Baltimore going to also be owned a little bit, but have a better chance of being the top stack than their ownership. And I guess you could go against Davy Garcia, a guy who hasn't faced a ton of batters in the majors so far, but giving up a 237 ISO to righties. Strikeout rate for him about league average 22.6%, so a little under where it should be, 22.9%, normally the average marker here. But Baltimore 4.3 implied runs, not a priority play, I'd say, Greg, but do you have any sort of lean here? Would you like any Garcia or would you like any Baltimore Orioles for yourself?
Not really. I'm finding it difficult to get to the Orioles, just with it being a big slate. And I mean, 4.8% odds of being the top scoring team on the slate, but they're also picking up 5% ownership. They are pretty cheap, so they have a decent chance of being a top value, but there's not really that much pitching, in my opinion, to pay up for on this slate. Like Corbin Burns is an obvious pay up option on both Fanduel and Draftkings, but he's not priced like an ace. And this is an issue. I don't know if we call it an issue, but just an overall lineup construction thing we've seen as of late. Like when you get guys like Corbin Burns who's pitching as well as he has, Jacob deGrom is pitching as well as he has, and these guys are only priced in the 10,000 range on Draftkings and Fanduel, they just become almost like free squares, because we're seeing deGrom average like nearly 40 DraftKings points per start this year. Corbin Burns, I think he's yet to walk somebody this year, and he's only allowed a couple of runs. Like he's like a 0.39 ERA for the entire season. So when you see him with a positive matchup against the Marlins, I mean, the 10,400 price tag, he's like $2,000 too cheap. So when I'm looking at the overall state of the top stacks tool and just looking for like the value, it's just not that important for me on this slate, because it's easy enough to fit Corbin Burns in, especially when there isn't an expensive SP2 that I really want to get to.
Okay. No, I think that makes some degree of sense. Yeah. So Baltimore going to be a team, better chance of being a top value, better chance of being a top stack today on the slate, and not the most appealing, but certainly some ways they do change your lineup construction around in a helpful way. Guys, smash that like button here too. We got 9 games to get through, so we're going to make hopefully some pretty good time here. But if we have any questions, well, try to drop them in there because I'm going between the two screens. If you have anything you want to ask, feel free to do so in here. And yeah, let's keep going here. Nothing too good in the chat right now. Next game up, we got the Cubs getting 3.3 implied runs against Charlie Morton on the is that right? And then on the other side, yeah, the Braves getting 4.7 implied runs against Zach Davies. Yeah, I think I'm messing around with my sheet during the show, so I'm just making sure I didn't screw anything and break anything as we're going. Morton, 8,000 price tag, pretty good projection on him. Does seem like a nice situation to be going to overall. And Greg, you said you ran some crunches here, so where you're landing with Charlie Morton, given the fact that he is going to be a bit overowned as a pitcher, but still looks like one of the best plays on the slate.
Yeah, so right now I do have him as my second most rostered starting pitcher on DraftKings, behind Corbin Burns in the FanDuel build I did. Corbin Burns is actually in almost all the lineups, but Morton is the second most owned starting pitcher also for me on FanDuel. So FanDuel or DraftKings, to me, I do view Morton as the second best option on the slate. So the Chicago Cubs, a team who maybe have some name on paper, would be like, oh, the Cubs, I don't want to roster pitchers against them. But I mean, so far this year, the Cubs have an 87 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They got rid of Kyle Schwarber in the offseason. It's a team that's definitely not nearly as loaded as they've been in previous years, and especially the end of their batting order. You know, at the top of the order, they still have Anthony Rizzo. They still have Chris Bryant. Javi Baez has struggled in a really big way. He actually has pretty similar numbers to Corbin Burns in terms of a strikeout to walk rate, but from a hitter standpoint. So he's been terrible. The end of the lineup is bad. So I think this is a pretty favorable matchup for Charlie Morton. Definitely more so pitching against the Cubs than it has been in previous seasons.
Yeah, the price tag really jumps out here. And I know you were mentioning Corbin Burns and all of that before, Greg, but given the price tag for Morton, do you see him being an SP2 you can get to, or is he a guy you're getting to as your SP1 in spots that you're not paying up for Burns?
Well, I mean, Burns is in over 90% of my lineups right now, okay. But given the price of Corbin Burns and Charlie Morton, 10,400 for Burns, 8,000 for Morton on DraftKings, it is not hard to fit them both in a lineup together and then kind of stack whoever you want. Outside of, you know, like the Yankees are really expensive, but that's a team I'm going to be underweight to the field on. Like in general, even some of the top stacks, like even Angels stacks that include Mike Trout, it is not hard to do that with Corbin Burns and Charlie Morton as the pitchers. The pitchers are just not priced properly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Morton in particular, one of the price tag on him on DraftKings, 8K, 26% K rate going against a Cubs team, as Greg mentioned, not as good as they have been in previous years against righties. 6 guys who strike out above league average. To me, Morton looks like one of the more underpriced plays in the slate. And I think I would be there in a pretty good way. I think, Burns, we're going to talk about more coming up, and Greg has given sort of the overarching views on how good he's going to be on the slate. But Morton, to me, a play you could put in place of Burns, and I think have similar upside, and a play you could put in with Burns if you can afford him there. The Cubs, though, on their side, they are still going to have a better chance of being a top stack than their ownership. Not a lot of ownership at all going to them on DraftKings, 4% chance of being the top stack. Do you see yourself getting any Cubs here at all with a 3.3 implied run total? And they are getting some leverage going against Charlie Morton.
Yeah, so it's funny because everything I just said, as bad as I think the Cubs offense is, and I totally agree with that, I don't think that they're an overall good offense. I think they're overrated. Still, I'm going to have to look at the top stacks still. And something that does tend to happen a lot is if there's going to be a popular starting pitcher, a lot of times the stack they're going up against is under-owned. So like you said, right now on DraftKings, we have the Cubs projected for a 4.5% chance of being the top stack, but only 2.5% ownership. So for that reason, that makes them a team that at least I want to be a little bit overweight to the field on. Then Fanduel, 4% chance of being the top stack on the team, only 1.5% ownership as a team. So still a team I want to stack. And there are pitchers outside of Morton, like Trevor Rogers, that I like as an SP2. So I think getting to like Burns and Rogers and then having a Cub stack, not like in a significant way, but just as leverage, kind of as a hedge against some of my lineups. I think that is a sensible way to hedge on this slate.
And what would be the priority hitters for you in Cub stacks if you were to get there? I think going to Contreras and Rizzo seems like there will be the 2 highest owned plays on DraftKings. And I guess you'll have some value going to David Bote, and it's Bote, right? That's the way to say it. Right? Bodie, damn it. All right, Eric Sogard. In my mind, it's going to be Bote. I feel like that gives him a bit of an island rhythm that he normally would not have. Eric Sogard at the bottom, those guys picking up ownership. But I feel like Ian Happ being in the leadoff spot, 3,700, he jumps out to me as having some value. Morton has struggled a little bit more versus lefties, and Happ being a switch hitter, I feel like that gives him a bit of an edge that's not represented right now in the ownership.
Yeah, so the hitters that I have the most exposure to right now in Cub stacks on DraftKings, it's Ian Happ, 3,700, likely going to be leading off. Then we have David Bote, who's probably going to be hitting towards the end of the lineup, but he's only 2,900. And then Anthony Rizzo, just because he's only 4,100 on DraftKings, that is a little bit too cheap for him. We're typically seeing Anthony Rizzo, around like a 5,000 price tag on Fanduel. Let's see, which Cubs do I have in the lineups that I built on Fanduel? Also, something else to mention about this game, which probably bad time to mention it because we're trying to at least somewhat say here the Cubs hitters I have some interest in, but the wind is also blowing in, so even more reason to not like the offenses. But Anthony Rizzo 3,300 on Fanduel and Ian Happ at 2,500 on Fanduel. Those are the 2 guys that are popping up the most in Cub stacks for me.
All right, Atlanta's got the higher implied road total in this game, 4.7 implied runs against Zach Davies. Davies, for the most part, not missing bats too well, 20.6% K rate, only a 9% swing strike rate, though he has improved over the last season and change going back to 2019, 17% K rate, 8% swing strike rate. I don't really like Davies very much. I guess he is technically under-owned according to the top pitchers tool, which is part of that Awesemo Plus membership that we talked about earlier in the show. But I think the Atlanta stack would look more appealing, except for the fact they're also going to be pretty highly owned, 7% chance of being the top stack, about 12% ownership expected. So I think really, to me, Greg, I don't want to go to Zach Davies very much. I don't want to go to the Braves very much because of them being over-owned. I think you make the better case for the Braves stack, but do you find either Atlanta or Zach Davies to be meaningful parts of your build so far?
All right. So, by the way, let me just refresh this because I have different ownership than you. So, one of us doesn't have the most recent. Let's see.
Ooh,
Let's see which it is. So, most recent for Atlanta. Okay. I have the more recent. Oh, no, wait. It's still refreshing.
No, yeah, I got the most recent one. It's 7.3 on DraftKings versus 12%.
That's for FanDuel.
No, it's for DraftKings.
I just refreshed it.
I can tell you, I ain't pulling no DraftKings. Actually, maybe did it automatically pull FanDuel? Maybe I did.
To me,
you're right.
Okay, there we go. I was going to say these teams are, because that was one of the things I was thinking about when I was looking at before, is I couldn't believe the ownership difference on the Braves between DraftKings and FanDuel. So on DraftKings as a stack, they're only projected for 6.8% ownership, but on FanDuel, they're projected for 12% ownership. So as a pay up option, I think the Braves look appealing as a stack on DraftKings, but not at all on FanDuel, given the wild difference in ownership between the two. They have almost double the ownership on FanDuel compared to DraftKings. So not a team that looks very interesting to me on FanDuel, but DK definitely a team that I think is a good pay up to be a little bit of a contrarian as a stack.
All right, now I got my DraftKings one, and yeah, I don't know how I landed on the Fanduel one because I always pull up DraftKings first, but I don't know, whatever. Point being, yeah, Atlanta, according to these ownership numbers that are correct, a little bit under-owned, so scratch that one from the record here, but still not by a lot here, so wouldn't be shocking to see that flip throughout the day. And I guess the thumbnail boy does stand out as a priority hitter, but he's going to be 15% owned, Greg. Ronald Acuna going to be well represented, a high price tag as well for Atlanta. Freddie Freeman a little bit less owned. I feel like I would prefer him, but anybody you would prioritize in a Braves stack, I do think you probably have to have at least one of Acuna or Freeman if you are going to go the Braves way for either a mini stack or a 5-man.
Yeah. So as a one-off play and a guy that I think is power upside that isn't picking up a ton of ownership is Austin Riley, likely going to be batting 7th or at least towards the bottom of the order. But he's only at 3,200 on DraftKings, and he struggled to start the year, and somebody with really big power, but it just wasn't there in the first couple of weeks of the season. But he's homered twice in the last 3 games. So that makes me think that Austin Riley back on the right track and is starting to find his power swing again. So Austin Riley, given all the power numbers we've seen from him in the past and that the power numbers are finally starting to pick up, I think that he is a lower owned Braves hitter with the power upside and also a cheap price that is worth rostering.
All right, let's keep going here. And guys, smash that like button here. And again, if you are listening to this show or you have to jump off of YouTube, make sure to check out the Awesemo Podcast Network because this show will be on there. The NBA Strategy Show will be on there. Any shows with a shelf life will appear on there. And you can also win that free week of Awesemo Plus if you go to awesemo.com/podcast. Check out all the different feeds on there and leave 5 stars and a review with either your Twitter handle or your email address. So make sure to go check those out and subscribe to all the podcasts too so you can see whenever we have a show going up and you don't have time to watch, just take them on the run with you wherever you're going. Next game up, we got Oakland 4.3 implied runs against Rich Hill. Tampa Bay 4.2 implied runs against Sean Manaea. And Rich Hill, it does seem going to be a bit overowned on DraftKings today, assuming I got the right site for that one. But Rich Hill, 19.7% K rate since last season and change for him. Strikeout numbers fallen off a cliff a little bit, could be the shorter sample size, but it's not a great matchup against Oakland either. It's got a ton of power, 186 aggregate ISO in their lineup today. Only 4 guys who strike out above league average. I don't see a lot of reason to go to Rich Hill today, Greg. I don't know if you feel any differently here, but I think there's enough risk to going to him just because Oakland has a lot of power there, but also the strikeout stuff not being there for him, this not being a great strikeout lineup. I feel like Rich Hill would be a guy I wouldn't really want much of in the player pool.
I'm a little confused by the ownership here. I mean, given what everything looks like now, the A's are by far my favorite team to stack on the slate because the field is getting to Rich Hill with a little bit of ownership. The A's are hitting really well as of late. There's a ton of power upside in that lineup. And Rich Hill has just flat out not been good this year. We're seeing his average fastball velocity is now below 90 miles per hour. Like you said, the strikeouts aren't there. The walk numbers are up versus what they've been for his career. He's also giving up a 23.5% home run to fly ball rate. So an 8.82 ERA, a 5.29 expected ERA. So Rich Hill, I just don't think he's a particularly good pitcher anymore. And it's not that surprising, right? He's 41 years old. There comes a point in time where somebody's going to drop off a cliff. So when you see the numbers are on the decline, the velocity's on the decline, like to me, all this adds up to a pitcher who's clearly on the downside of his career, but that's just not what the ownership bears out. Like you said, he's picking up a little bit of ownership as a pitcher. And then as for the A's stack, we have them with a 7.7% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, only 3% ownership on DraftKings. On Fanduel, the A's, 7.5% odds of being the top stack, 3.3% ownership. So the A's going wildly over-owned in one of the teams we have projected to be one of the higher scoring teams on the slate. So as of right now, this is the team I have the most exposure to as a stack.
Yeah, I don't know that the thing with Hill is that his numbers have fallen off in a major way, as Greg was talking about, only a 6.5% swing strike rate for him since 2020. And I think maybe I thought one of the things of Tampa Bay picking up was that they thought there was a little bit more they can get to with him, just to squeeze out of his arm before he does end up retiring or playing another 5 years of middling impact. But that has not been the case. The one thing, though, that he has been doing well, only a 3.1% home run rate, so he's not getting killed by power. And also the park factors here are going to benefit him a little bit more in terms of keeping the ball in, only 0.83 home runs for every 1 home run elsewhere. But still, I feel like I agree with you. Oakland, to me, undervalued. I don't know that I'd want to go crazy heavy on them because it's only a 7.7% chance of being the top stack, but a lot of ways you can carve these guys up here. And really, as long as you're not taking a Mark Canha, or even if you are, everybody else besides Canha is going to be under 5% owned, it looks like, on DraftKings. So lots of ways you can go to Oakland. I guess same question then, Greg, as usual. Anybody you'd prioritize in Oakland, given the fact that these guys are all pretty much equally underowned?
Yeah, I mean, even though it's a left-on-left matchup, I know that that's something that generally tends to mute ownership a little bit. But Matt Olson, whose power numbers have just been ridiculous this year, he's among the league leaders in homers. I don't care that he's facing a lefty because, like I said, I don't think Rich Hill's any good anymore. So Matt Olson, I think that he's a good option on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Matt Chapman, like you said, Kana, he's going to be popular, but still, he's not expensive. Like everybody in this lineup, other than Matt Chapman and Matt Olson, are reasonably priced. So, I mean, I have a lot of exposure to pretty much everybody here. This is, like I said, this is the team that I have the most exposure to. And that's going to be the case unless the ownership changes because just everything to me adds up right here. Rich Hill being 41 years old, declining skill set, A's not picking up that much ownership while also being one of the best offenses in baseball over the last few weeks. I mean, I just don't really understand what the field is looking at here.
On the other side, we have Sean Manaea, who has had some strikeout ability recently, but overall, the last season and change, only a 21% K rate, 3.8 xFIP, showing that he's not giving up a ton of production. So I guess that's one positive that he is going for him, in addition to that rising strikeout rate, but still longer term sample of the last season, 319 batters faced, 21% K rate, not the best number. Going against Tampa Bay lineup with only 4 guys that strike out above league average. I really don't love either side of this equation very much. I think the Tampa Bay stack would look more appealing to me, Greg, than going to Manaea, who is going to be kind of surprisingly owned. I think people chasing some of those recent numbers, but Manaea, I don't see the stuff being there and a big enough change where I'm expecting him to suddenly have a big jump in strikeout rate. Do you really like either side here of the Tampa Bay hitters or Sean Manaea?
Not really. I have a little bit more interest in the Rays than Manaea, but it's not saying much. The Rays are a very, very low owned stack right now for me in my build. Manaea has pitched, like you said, fairly well this year, but still, I think that Corbin Burns is a better pitching option. Charlie Morton, Trevor Rogers, Shohei Ohtani. There's a bunch of guys that I'd rather get to than Sean Manaea. Also, fairly tough matchup against the Tampa Bay Rays, who have a 106 WRC plus against left-handed pitching so far this year. So, no interest in Manaea. As a contrarian stack, I don't think the Rays are a terrible choice, but they're about appropriately owned.
Yep. So I think that sums it up pretty well. We got a couple more games to get to, or I guess a bunch more games to get to. So hit that like button, guys. Next one up, got Miami 2.7 implied runs against Corbin Burns, one of the stars of the slate. 39% K rate for him over the last season and change. 35% K rate going back to 2019. So nothing that you're expecting to be an aberration at this point. This is who he is. This is who he's been this season in a major way. Facing a Miami lineup with 6 guys that strike out above league average. And if you look at the top stacks tool, I guess there is a case to be made just in terms of them not being owned at all and having a 1.6% chance of being the top stack for Miami. But Greg, this clearly seems like a spot. Corbin Burns, you mentioned having 90% of him earlier. I would agree that number seems, even if you want to nickel and dime it down to the 55% the field's going to have, you should probably have Corbin Burns in at least half your lineups and probably more.
Corbin Burns has 40 strikeouts this year and 0 walks. He's allowed 1 earned run. He scored over 30 DraftKings points in every single start this year. Just the price is wrong. I view him as a free square. Roster him in almost all your lineups and move on, get different elsewhere. I love Corbin Burns. I think he's the best overall play on the slate. It's a favorable matchup against the Marlins. And the price is just wrong on FanDuel and DraftKings. Even FanDuel, where it's a single pitcher site, Corbin Burns is in the majority of my lineups.
Yeah, Corbin Burns, just to go through the numbers, 0.8 whip since 2020, 153 batting average, 39% K rate, swing strike rate, 15.6%, chase rate, 35%. These numbers back it all out. The one thing you could point to is I do think he's going to give up more power and playing in Milwaukee more seems like that's going to lead to him having, a bit of a jump here. Only a 0.9% home run rate over the last season, 3.6% home run rate going back to 2019. But that to me is just pointing out one thing that I expect to regress a little bit. I still would say Corbin Burns. Strikeout stuff's been good and a really good matchup too to keep it going. So no issue going to Burns. Any Miami stacks at all for you here, or are you just staying away because you're going to have so much Burns?
Stay away. If the Marlins happen to be the top scoring team on the slate, I am shit out of luck anyway, and I'm losing basically all my entry fees. So be it if that's the case. But I don't like to stack against aces. Corbin Burns is somebody who I've been on pretty much from before the season. I've bets on him up to 45-1 to win the NL Cy Young this year. It's probably going to be DeGrom who wins, but I like the value I have on Corbin Burns. But he's a pitcher I like a ton, and I'm going to be rostering a lot in DFS this season.
On the other side, we have Trevor Rogers, another guy who has shown some pretty good signs of improvement, or really just, I guess, a good run here since last season. A 32% K rate, 3.5 xFIP, not as good as a Corbin Burns overall with a 1.3 whip, so giving up some more walks and hits. And he's also given up a little bit more power. But Rogers, I think another play in that mid tier. I would certainly prefer to get a little bit cheaper and go to Charlie Morton, but Rogers going against Milwaukee seems like a pretty good spot. 5 guys who strike out above league average in their lineup. No Christian Yelich expected again, so that's going to be a helpful addition or subtraction, I guess, for Trevor Rogers. But Rogers, I think, solid, a little bit overowned, but still a very good play as well, though not quite as good as Corbin Burns.
Yeah, so Rogers is currently my third most rostered starting pitcher on both DraftKings and Fanduel, but that still has me underweight to the field on him. Like you said, I think that Charlie Morton is the slightly preferred option in the mid-range, which isn't really a knock on Trevor Rogers. He's had a really good start to the year. It's just he's my third favorite starting pitcher as opposed to my second favorite starting pitcher. So if I was playing cash games tonight, then I would go Corbin Burns and Charlie Morton as my 2 pitchers on DraftKings. I think Corbin Burns is a pretty no-brainer FanDuel cash option. So Trevor Rogers this year, he's taken some pretty significant steps forward. He's striking out a ton of guys. The velocity is also really high. His average fastball velocity has gone from 93.7 miles per hour last year to 94.8 this year. So far, 1.64 ERA, a 2.41 expected ERA. And everything looks great. The Milwaukee Brewers, as a team, they're striking out a 32.1% clip this year against left-handed pitching. So I think this is a pretty high upside spot for Trevor Rogers. He's definitely somebody to get to, but like I said, I just have a slight lean towards Morton in terms of pitchers that's an SP2 in that price range.
Any Milwaukee stack interest here with them having the exact same odds of being a top stack relative to their ownership? It looks like about 2.8% for each on DraftKings.
No, I don't. Trevor Rogers, I still think is really good. I think that he is one of the better young left-handed pitchers in baseball, only 23 years old. And like I said, all the numbers look really good. The velocity is also on the increase. So it'll be interesting to see where the Marlins trade him to in a couple of years.
All right, let's keep going here. We got Philadelphia, 3.9 implied runs against Adam Wainwright. The other side, St. Louis, 4.1 implied runs against Zach Wheeler. Wainwright going to be mostly unknown. Wheeler, mostly unknown. A little bit of representation, but not a ton for either guy. And the stacks as well, it does seem like Philadelphia, slightly higher odds of being a top stack in their ownership. Currently looks like going against Wainwright. And Wainwright, I feel like the struggles against lefties would give me a bit of a bump to one-off Bryce Harper. I also don't mind Didi Gregorius at a reasonable price tag as well. Lefty splits for Wainwright, giving up a 205 ISO since 2019, 5.7 xFIP compared to a 3.1 xFIP versus righty. So pretty big splits for him. But besides that, Greg, I really don't like Wainwright. I don't love Philadelphia. I think taking the one-offs would be the approach I would want there. So you feel any differently here? Does any guy jump out here from the Philly stack or from Adam Wainwright's side?
So I'm going to be overweight to the field on the Phillies today. They're going a little bit under-owned. And like you said, I do think that Wainwright could be exploited just based on rostering left-handed batters against him. So I think that Bryce Harper as a pay-up option isn't a bad choice. It's not a team that is one of my priority plays. If I'm paying up for an offense, it is going to be the Oakland A's by and large part. But the Phillies are a team that I'm slightly overweight to the field to at the moment.
All right, we got the St. Louis side here, and we know I've made clear my many gripes at St. Louis recently, and I think today it's just a spot going against Zach Wheeler, whose strikeout numbers have dropped off a bit, a 20.4% K rate since last season compared to a 22.6% K rate, which is never that great anyway, going back to 2019. Wheeler, I think, was the weakest of the Mets pitchers that got paid a lot to go and be somewhere else and be mediocre again. Wheeler, just a dude that I'm not dying to get too much, Greg. I guess the projection could make him pop up some in an optimizer, but how are you feeling about Zach Wheeler? I just feel like I'd rather take any of the 8K guys we talked about, the Charlie Mortons or Trevor Rogers, above Zach Wheeler by a pretty decent margin.
Yeah, I never really roster Zach Wheeler, but I also, at the same time, never really stack guys against him. His strikeout numbers are up so far this year, but it's only been 4 starts overall for the course of his career. He hasn't been a high strikeout guy, so he's generally somebody who doesn't have all that much upside, but he's still a quality enough starting pitcher, so he's not just going out there and getting lit up all the time. So I mean, if we look at last year over the course of the full season, he only struck out 6.72 hitters per 9 innings. So that really limits his amount of fantasy upside. But then he had a 2.92 ERA and a 3.58 expected ERA. So he was not somebody who was generating huge amounts of fantasy points, but he wasn't allowing huge amounts of fantasy points either. So this is going to make it not real a lot of interest in me for the pitcher nor for the offense.
Yeah, I would agree here. Yeah, the offense, the Cardinals, I have certainly thrown some shade out in various shows just because I think they do tend to be overvalued by both their fans and the marketplace compared to their abilities to produce. Though today it does seem like they have higher odds of being a top stack than their stack ownership is currently projected. I feel like to me, I just don't love the Cardinal stack. And I know Greg, you said the same here, but going against Weir, only a 2% home run rate as his numbers have fallen over the last year and change, especially the strikeout numbers. But still, the fact he's not giving up a lot of power means that I don't see anything to target on either side. I know you said it, Greg, but just in terms of your ownership here, they are under owned. So your Cardinals ownership, do you anticipate being above the field or just with it?
Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of the same as the field. The only guy who I'm really getting to show up in lineups right now is Dylan Carlson on both Fanduel and Draftkings. He's moved up in the batting order. He's been hitting fifth lately, and also one of the better young outfield prospects in baseball. He's somebody that I think makes sense just given what his price tag is, and then he's hit the ball well recently. And then on Fanduel, Tommy Edman being priced at only 2,800. That's a little bit too cheap of a price for him, but by and large part, this is just not a team that I'm really dying to stack. There's just a couple of individual plays who I have like in 5% of my lineups.
All right, next game up, we got the Angels getting 4.6 implied runs against Jordan Lyles. Worth pointing out, Texas starting to heat up a little bit more. 82 degrees, it looks like, will be the temperature in Texas, which is an important factor here to consider because it's been mostly cold to start the year, and I think it does reflect some of the park factors you're going to see out there. The Angels going against Lyles, certainly to me, going to be a priority stack. I would say, though, they do look a bit over-owned, 17% ownership compared to a 13% chance of being the top stack. The value pricing, though, I think is what makes them jump out a little bit more. They have a 14% chance being the top value. So to me in the spot, just going against Lyles, the guy who has a 213 ISO allowed since 2019, only a 15% K rate over the last season. And this spot against an Angels team that's not going to offer up a lot of strikeouts anyway. I think there are a lot of ways this could go very poorly for Jordan Lyles. So Greg, I'll say for me, no Jordan Lyles exposure seems about right. And getting a good amount of Angels, even with the ownership being high, would still be a move that I'd want to take.
Yeah, so the Angels are definitely a team I'm going to be stacking. It's not like they're as overowned as the Yankees, but I'm still going to be underweight to the Angels as a stack on DraftKings. FanDuel is a different story because FanDuel, they have a 12% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but only 11% ownership. So they're actually going a little bit underowned on FanDuel. But DraftKings, where they have a 17% ownership share, it's not quite, like I said, the Yankees situation, but it's a spot where we have 24 or 9 games, so 18 offenses on the slate to choose from. It's hard for me to believe that any one team has a 25 or 17% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate. So therefore, as a stack, I'm going to be underweight to the Angels. Something else here that's obviously going to be really important for the slate is that Mike Trout is dealing with an elbow injury. He's missed the last couple of games. It's a really dumb injury. I don't know if you saw. I assume you didn't see it, Spags, but basically he intentionally got hit by a pitch. There was a pitch that was a strike. It was a strike over the middle of the plate. He stuck his elbow out, got hit by it, took the base, and hasn't played since. So to me, that was overall a net negative EV play by him, even though he got first base, because now the Angels have been out Mike Trout for the last couple of games. But yeah, I have no clue if he's going to play or not today. But that's also going to have a lot of sway on what their ownership and what their odds of being the top scoring team is. So have to see what ends up happening with Trout for sure.
I was also just looking up on my phone to see how DraftKings is handling Ohtani today because of him pitching and expected hit in the 2-hole. And he's not accruing any hitting stats today, which in case I guess you haven't played an Ohtani slate with him and pitcher, that's something to point out, which it just feels like it makes the stack more confusing to get to because missing out on one hitter who also is going to be in a pretty good situation with Lyles giving up a 222 ISO to lefties. I guess, how are you handling that? And do you knock down the Angels stack a little bit more, Greg, because you have one player in there who can't get that production and it could also be a meaningful part of that production?
Yeah, it's so hard to know what to make of them. Like right now, I just ran my lineups as is, and obviously I just don't get exposure to Ohtani with that being the case. But the other thing also is I don't know whether Mike Trout is playing or not. So that makes it really hard to know as a whole what to make of the Angels as a team. Let's see, right now I had them stacked in 6% of my lineups, just given how overowned I think they are at the moment. So it's something that's popping up for me, but like we're talking about like a third of the ownership the field has, but still it's a thing where it's like, I don't really know which players it is I'm actually targeting when Ohtani isn't going to be an option for us. And Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, we don't know whether he's playing or not. So I don't know exactly which Angels I'm going to be getting to at the moment.
There's some news to watch out for. Live Before Lock coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern time today, 12 p.m. Pacific time. So make sure to tune into that. I'll be actually back on that today with Terry and Alex. So tune in there and hang out before the tip off. I get to do 2 shows back to back. So if you are somebody out there who foolishly thinks you need more Spags in your life, boy, today is a day for you because you are getting 3 hours of content. Let's keep going to the Angel side. Show Ohtani at his price tag, I think is appealing. Not as appealing as the 8K guys. Morton and Rogers are the ones I'm going to keep pointing to, but Ohtani, decent projection on him. The strikeout rate's been there for him, a 29.8% carried. Only has faced 57 batters, so not a lot over the last season and change, but still, those numbers have been there for him. The concern is really the walks and hits allowed have been pretty high, a 6.2 xFIP overall. This is very small sample size ball, though, Greg. So I know you've been more of an Ohtani guy, especially as a hitter. I think we haven't talked much about him as a pitcher, but he's shown some upside as a pitcher. Hard to expect him to go that deep into a game, but the projection on him from Awesemo, 17-point projection on DraftKings. I think I would get some Ohtani today just because of that projection and the price tag.
Yeah, and the ownership, right? So Ohtani right now is only projected for 2% ownership at a 7,700 price tag. He's 9,100 on Fanduel, so that makes him a lot less appealing. But at 7,700 on DraftKings as an SP2, I will certainly be way overweight to the 2% ownership the field has. I think that if that sticks, Ohtani's one of the stronger GPP plays on the slate. There's a whole lot of variance here. He's been so inconsistent so far as a pitcher this year. Just looking at his per 9 inning stats, 14.54 strikeouts per 9 innings and 11.42 walks per 9 innings. So he has no clue where the ball is going when it leaves his hand, but neither do the hitters, and they can't hit him. So it's basically he's either striking guys out or he's walking. The ball is never getting in play, but that's kind of something that's appealing for an SP2, especially when he's that cheap. Because if he's the top scoring pitcher on the slate, I wouldn't say it's not going to. It would surprise me if he's the second highest scoring pitcher on the slate behind Corbin Burnes. That wouldn't surprise me. If he scores more fantasy points than Burnes, that would be a shocker to me. But yeah, I mean, Ohtani ending up in the optimal lineup, I mean, that to me is not a crazy outcome, especially given his fastball velocity this year, 97.3 miles per hour so far. So he seems very healthy, especially last year when he struggled with arm health. In the brief amount of time we saw him on the mound, he only had a 93.9 average fastball velocity. So the velocity is up. I assume he's healthy. He just needs to throw strikes. And I do think there's a dominant outing coming at some point soon.
It's also worth pointing out you can't play him at outfield and get the pitching stats either, because that's something I was just making sure that there wasn't a wrinkle there that you can exploit. But so you have to play him at a pitching spot. You can't play him at outfield, and you're not getting his hitting stats either way. So keep that in mind if you're going to play Ohtani. But as a pitcher, just as Greg mentioned, looks good, but it's going to be about as volatile of a pitching situation as you'll find, just because he has not been able to consistently find the plate. But when he does find the plate, he's blowing dudes away. So it is a bit of a weird situation overall to look at. Texas 3.9 implied runs on their side going against Ohtani. And the issue really for me is if he gets the ball over the plate, I mean, he's been giving up a good amount of hard contact to righties in particular, 56% hard contact rate. I don't hate the idea of going to a Texas stack either, just because they do have some chance of being a top stack and you're going against a volatile pitcher, but only a 3.7% chance of being a top stack compared to 3.4% ownership. So I don't think they'd be well represented in lineups today, Greg, but do you feel anything particularly strongly for the Rangers, who are starting to get some better hitters in the mix, guys like Adolis Garcia, who has shown some sort of pop in his limited major league time?
Yeah, so I mean, here's why I have a very small amount of exposure to the Texas Rangers as a stack. If Ohtani's just not able to find the strike zone and comes out, and like we've seen this happen before, he could walk 4 guys in the first inning and they'd be like, hey, you know what? Ohtani's one of the guys that we are massively invested in. We care a lot about his future, and they have no issue with pulling the plug early with Ohtani. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that he could be actually. Here's the only thing I'd be surprised by with Ohtani: if he's just decent. He's either going to be really, really good or really, really bad today. I tend to lean more towards the really good spot end, especially because the Rangers have an overall weak offense that strikes out a ton. But if he does struggle early, like we might only see a couple of innings for Ohtani, and then we could see the Angels bullpen really have to get extended. So there is a path to upside for the Rangers, and given the volatility of Ohtani, I think they're worth at least a few stacks. Like I have them in 4% of my lineups right now.
In the Angels bullpen about as average as can be overall, 1.3 whip allowed, 237 batting average. So they're fine. They're not bad, but yeah, definitely some volatility here that could be exploited, whether it be pro Ohtani or going against Ohtani. 7th game on the slate coming up here. We got Seattle, 3.8 implied runs against Jose Urquidy. Urquidy's strikeout rate down 18% over the last season and change. Another guy who projects okay, but not quite as good as Charlie Morton, not quite as good as Trevor Rogers. Seattle's side for the hitters do have a lot more ownership expected in their chances of being a top stack, though they are a top value stack today. It looks like a 10% chance of hitting that number compared to their 9.3% overall ownership. And I could see getting to Seattle and an optimizer, Greg, just to open some things up. But the fact that they're so chalky, Mitch Haniger, every slate is so highly owned. And I get it. He's hitting leadoff. He's a guy with power, but not a spot I'd want to be on a very highly owned Mariners team. And I feel like for Urquidy too, like the numbers for him have just not been that good that I don't really want to go his way. But I guess if he's going to offer up some leverage on Seattle, I don't think Urquidy is a terrible play, even though, again, I would favor Morton and Rogers by a pretty good margin.
Yeah, I don't have interest in either side of this game. I'm so confused by the Seattle ownership also. Like, this to me is equally as weird to Ohtani being 1% owned, but I mean, almost 10% ownership for the Seattle Mariners. I mean, I guess they've been okay. They've had some decent games as of late, but to your point also, like Mitch Haniger being one of the most popular hitters on the slate, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So, I mean, a Seattle team that we have projected for a 5.8% chance of being the top stack on the slate, but then 9.3% ownership share on DraftKings. I think this is a pretty easy team to be, massively underweight to the field on.
Yep. On the other side, we have Houston, who it does seem a better case can be made for them to play as a stack. 8.4% chance of being a top stack today, only 6% ownership. Going against Justice Sheffield, who's mostly gotten his power issues under control. Only a 121 ISO allowed over the last couple seasons. And strikeout numbers for him, though, still pretty average, 21% K rate. I don't love Justice Sheffield very much, even at the cheap price tag. I do think Houston, though, going their way as a stack, as a 5-man, as a 3-man, I think to me they would be one of the better stacks on how I'm looking at the slate, Greg. But how do you feel about Houston here? And I guess any interest at all in Justice Sheffield as a very, very cheap pay down option?
So once again, this is a team that's, by the way, no interest in me for on Justice Sheffield, but an Astros team very different on Fanduel versus DraftKings. DraftKings, they look like one of the best teams on the slate. This is the team that I have the second most exposure to as a stack behind the Oakland A's right now. They're going under-owned on DraftKings, where we have them with an 8.5% chance about to be the top scoring team on the slate. And like you said, 6% ownership share. But then on FanDuel, they have an 11.5% ownership share. So on FanDuel, they're looking like they're going pretty heavily over-owned, but DraftKings, people just aren't getting there. I think a lot of this has to do with just how much the field is flocking to the Yankees and the Angels. I mean, those two teams combined are taking up 40% of the stacks on the slate. So to me, the Astros are definitely a priority team to stack up on DK.
And Bregman's certainly a priority play. He's going to be decently owned, but not as owned as you might think relative to some of these slates where he's been chalk, but he does have the 350 ISO against left-hand pitching. Also, Yordan Alvarez hits lefties better than people realize. Always only 5% ownership going his way, despite a 324 ISO against lefties. So some of the core guys you can get for the Astros, but anyway, you can get these guys. It does seem like a pretty worthwhile play relative to ownership, as Greg was talking about. We've got 2 more games here, so let's just go through and hit that like button, guys. We appreciate it a bunch, especially as NBA is going on. We need that love here more than ever. So 2 dislikes, those people need to go screw. But everybody else out there, we appreciate you guys for being here in the chat and watching the stream. So hit that like button and support the show because MLB season going to have a lot of profitable tournaments out there as long as you're playing it, even though the NBA is still clearly the dominant DFS sport right now. Show a little love, hit that like button. Last couple games, Colorado 3.2 implied runs against Anthony DeSclafani. In this spot, DeSclafani going to probably not be the most appealing play to me. He's going to be decently owned in a spot that I guess nice run total with the 3.2 implied runs for Colorado, but DeSclafani 19% carried over the last season. Plus going back to 2019 was looking a little better, 22.9% K rate. DeSclafani just one of those dudes that I'm never dying to get to. How are you feeling about him, Greg? Because the ownership for him on DraftKings, I find surprising given the fact that Charlie Morton was projected for projected for less at $100 more. And I just don't get that at all.
So DeSclafani's actually pitched very well so far this year. He is striking out a hitter per inning, so 9 hitters per 9 innings. His walk numbers are way down from last year. Last year, he struggled with his control and walked 4.28 hitters per 9 innings. This year, he's only walking 2.57 guys. So if we just look at this year, he has a 2.14 ERA and a 3.42 expected ERA for this season. So if we're just isolating it to what we've seen so far, and by the way, I'm focusing my numbers a little bit more now on what I've seen so far this year. This is the first show I've done where I just have in front of me the WRC plus numbers for this season for the teams in front of me. And now it's obviously not a massive sample size, but it's at least, we have a few weeks from the offenses. We have, 4 to 5 starts at a starting pitcher. So from that standpoint, I understand it. I prefer Rogers. I prefer Morton to DeSclafani, but just given how well he's pitched so far this year, I do have a little bit of interest in him. Not quite as much as the field has, but he's in my player pool.
Okay, yeah, I think to me, even if I'm not looking just at 2021 numbers because I do pull the last year in addition to going back a few years, and going back to 2019, he did have that 22.6% K rate. I just find it hard to believe he's going to be meaningfully better than that. So I guess that's what's informing my process. But if you are a buyer in the shorter term sample size for DeSclafani, I guess that is worth noting and maybe more of a justification to get to that ownership that's going to be there. Colorado side though, Greg, are going to be projected for a bit higher chance of being a top stack in their ownership, though only a 3% chance of being the top stack. Park factors, though, going to benefit a little bit more than people realize playing in a more friendly San Francisco park than over the previous couple seasons that people may not have gotten adjusted to, just the changes that have been going on there. Do you see any Colorado stacks for yourself? And I would play a little bit just given my non-belief in DeSclafani and the fact that he's going to be that highly owned.
So just when Colorado's on the road, so like while it's true that San Francisco is a better hitters park than we normally see, to me on the whole, I think there's a lot of Rockies hitters that end up getting a little bit overpriced just because of they get to play half their games at Coors Field. So it looks like, hey, a lot of these guys have good counting stats, and it's still San Francisco is nowhere near the hitters park that Colorado is. So I mean, the Rockies this year against right-handed pitching, the 75 WRC plus, and then still like Trevor Story's 4,600. Charlie Blackmon is 4,000. That's a reasonable price tag. Then CJ Corona is 4,000. Just overall, this is a very bad offense as a team when they go on the road and when they face right-handed pitching. I think a lot of that kind of gets muted or goes overlooked just because the numbers look good when they play Coors Field because, hey, it's Coors Field. But I can't really look past as a team that is a 75 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. And even over the course of the last few years, no matter who the Rockies have thrown out there, they've been towards the bottom of the league in road WRC plus and towards the bottom of the league in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. So I just think this is an overall very bad offense.
Yeah, it's fair. I think the one thing that does stand out is that they do have three lefties in their top four with Tapia, with McMahon, with Blackmon, and DeSclafani over the longer term sample size going back to 2019 has struggled significantly more versus lefties. At 214 ISO allowed, 4.6% home run rate compared to a 3.4% home run rate versus righties and a 149 ISO allowed. So I'm a little more into Colorado, though I agree, like they're not a good team by any stretch, but this is one spot to me where I can try to go against DeSclafani and the ownership that I think is a little bit higher. I'm willing to take it a little bit, though. Again, not worth going crazy on, only a 3% chance of being the top stack. Austin Gomber on the other side for Colorado going against the Giants lineup that also looks pretty solid, 191 aggregate ISO in their lineup today. Gomber himself has not gotten much in the way of strikeouts, 22.8% K rate. He has survived a lot more games than I think people would have expected him not to. Only a 1.5% home run rate and pitching decently in Coors, so maybe he can pitch decently in San Francisco's park too. Do you have any Gomber interest at all, or I guess Giant stack interest, given the fact that they also look a little bit overowned, it seems, according to the top stacks tool?
Yeah, not really a team I like that much. So Gomber, who I've been on the wrong end of in his Coors Field starts this year, because I look at the numbers for Gomber, it's like, oh, not a high strikeout guy. He walks guys. It's like, surely he's going to get lit up at Coors Field. Just hasn't been the case so far. He has a 3.38 ERA and a respectable 4.29 ERA. So he's just been, a middle of the road starting pitcher. He's definitely been a little bit lucky. He shouldn't have a 3.38 ERA, but it's not like he should be getting destroyed either. And then in terms of going against him from fantasy upside, I don't really think there's a whole lot there. He's a fairly high ground ball pitcher. He has a ground ball rate of over 40% for his career. And then he also has a low home run to fly ball rate. So there's a lot of balls going on the ground. And then even the ones that are hitting the air aren't leaving the park. And keep in mind, that's even with him pitching games at Coors Field this year. So Gomber doesn't look like he's a high upside guy to target against to this point.
Yeah, Gomber, I'm curious if the strikeout numbers can get a little bit better because he has had a 27% K rate versus righties compared to a 12.9% K rate versus lefties. And this is not the biggest sample size, only faced 206 batters over the last couple seasons. But I'm curious to see if he does get better because he has been avoiding power for the most part, as Greg mentioned, keeping the ball down. So Gomber may be a guy who has some potential, but going against the Giants lineup with only two guys that strike out above league average, probably not going to be a meaningful boost to the numbers, but maybe somebody to watch in upcoming starts where if he does pick up that strikeout upside, wouldn't be shocking to me. Last game on the slate, we got Cincinnati getting 2.9 implied runs against Julio Urias, who had 11 strikeouts the last time that he pitched. But Urias overall, over the last couple seasons, only a 24% K rate going back to 2019, a 22% K rate over the last season and change. And that includes some time coming out of the bullpen where I think that 11 strikeouts, Greg, is a bit of an aberration. But are you seeing anything that maybe gives you more reason to believe in Urias today on a slate where he's going to be mostly unknown because he is a expensive pitcher on a slate where everybody's going to be going to Corbin Burns?
Yeah, if he was cheaper, then I think I can make a case for him. But one of the things that's really difficult to me about rostering a lot of these Dodgers starting pitchers is sure, right? If it's an owner, if it's a slate where it's really hard to find pitching options, then I think it's viable to get to them. But one of the problems is just that the Dodgers are really cautious with their starting pitchers, and especially the young starting pitchers. So they don't really like to work a lot of these guys deep into games. Then you look at Urias at an inflated price tag, and it's kind of hard for me to see him, having a massive fantasy game unless he pitches, totally perfectly during the time he's on the mound, because most likely he's probably only going to be pitching 5 or maybe 6 innings. That makes it hard to get the maximum upside out of him. So I don't want to stack against him, especially because the Dodgers have a really good bullpen behind him. But at the same time, too, I have much higher priority plays for me than Urias right now. I don't have him totally faded in my lineups right now, but I mean, I only have him in 3% of my DK lineups at the moment.
Yeah, it does seem like he has a higher chance of being the top pitcher than his ownership right now. Only 6.5% ownership expected on DraftKings compared to a 12% chance of being the top pitcher. So I would agree Burns is a priority. I don't mind getting some Urias, but I really do think that he overall is not going to be the strikeout guy that we saw in that last start. And I think that what Greg said too is a pretty important point, that there is a sort of cap on what he's doing for the most part, where if he's not running amazingly good, he's probably going to be pitching, 5 innings of decent strikeout ball, but not that high upside ball. So something to keep in mind with Urias, especially on a slate where you do have a guy like Burns. On the other side, we have Tyler Mahle, whose strikeout stuff has really also taken a big upturn here. 32% K rate for him over the last season and changed, 26% K rate since 2019. And Mahle's stuff has looked good, though he's going against the Dodgers, which is going to make anybody look less good. I don't mind Mahle, but the price tag for a guy going against the Dodgers way too high here. I don't see him being an option because of that. And the Dodgers as well look a bit, actually they look appropriately owned as a stack. But I just think Mahle has been good enough here, and he's been doing a lot of that pitching in Cincinnati, where I don't expect it to be much worse going into the Dodgers park. I just don't see a lot of love for either side, Greg, but do you feel any differently here? Would you want some Mahle or some Dodgers hitters?
No. So one of the other things also, I mean, going up against the Dodgers, I'm almost never going to be rostering starting pitchers unless it's, like Yu Darvish or something like that on a slate where we don't have a lot of pitching options. I remember there was one day last week, I think it was, where I was rostering Darvish against the Dodgers. But beyond that, I think there's going to be very, very few slates where I'm actually actively rostering a starting pitcher against the Dodgers. As for the Dodgers as a stack, Molly's good enough to where I don't think they have all that much upside. I'd much rather pay up for the Astros or the A's on this slate. So I'm not going to have a meaningful amount of stacks of the Dodgers. I'm going to be, looks like probably about even with the field, given that they have equal odds of being the top stack as they do to their ownership.
Yeah, and Mahle has given up historically a little more power versus lefty. Is a 200 ISO allowed to that side of the plate with a 4.4% on run rate. Again, hitting or pitching a lot of that time in Cincinnati is going to help inflate those numbers too, but maybe a little bit of a boost. Corey Seager, it seems. Corey Seager has been one of those guys, and all the home run odds have kind of shocking, where he's been one of the best home run odds guys on the last couple slates, and also today, 14% ownership. Are you buying into whatever people are seeing with Corey Seager? Because he's the only Dodger projected for double-digit ownership, and that's surprising to me, given that Seager has been fine over the years, but not a dude that I think people are going out of their way to roster. And it does seem like that's been the case more recently for some reason.
So I mean, so far this year, Seager has been hitting ridiculously well. And then I think something else we have to consider with Corey Seager is he's had a lot of injury issues in the past. And last year, he had a 152 WRC plus. This year, he's a 123 WRC plus. I definitely think he's going over-owned on the slate. But I mean, overall, like if you look at sportsbook numbers, he's among the favorites to win the NL MVP this year. So there's definitely a lot of people backing him in general, but a lot of his value also comes from his positionality and his defense. But yeah, I think he's going over-owned for this slate in particular, especially because Molly's a quality starting pitcher.
Yeah, even with those lefty splits, I would have a hard time getting to the 14% ownership for Seager that's expected today. Maybe people finding it tough to fill the shortstop spot, but just something to keep in mind that people really loving Corey Seager going there a lot. And he has had a 254 ISO since 2020. So definitely some power upticks that have been there for him, but lately been a guy that's just a bit over-owned every time. And that covers everything here. So make sure to tune into the Live Before Lock show coming up in 3 hours. I'll be back here with Terry and Alex walking through everything here with two more great baseball minds. Greg gave people the plugs here. Of course, they should be following you at Ehrenberg Dfs. What other shows, what are the things you have coming up that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'll be doing NBA Live Before Lock later in the day. We've got a new schedule, a little mix up here. So I do NBA Live Before Lock pretty much every day now. So I'll be in there. So hopefully we don't have games just randomly locking early in the middle of me doing the show. That would be cool. So, I mean, to an extent, right? Other than like, here's the positive of that slate. my lineups were not going to be good that day anyway. And then I ended up getting refunded for the slate. So it was kind of like free rolling it. But yeah, like ideally the games would lock when they start. Like that's my preference anyway from a user experience.
I'll tell you what I hated about that was that I got the same thing too, where I emailed in when I couldn't do it because I was like, what the fuck? I was actually hand editing one lineup and was like, oh, what is going on here? Like I thought I was doing something wrong. And then I emailed and was like, I can't do this. Like it's breaking everything. Couldn't upload my lineups. Then did get to upload my lineups. The customer service people gave me the deal. I think they gave everybody where they were going to credit back any losses I had. And Greg, you know what I had to do on that day? Win $20 more than I put in. So I got no benefit from it. Didn't have good enough lineups to win anything. And I was just like, cool, this is the worst possible scenario where I still lost on the day because of UFC. It was not
I got my ass kicked on that slate. Although part of it also was because, so I don't presume that everybody just listens and remembers everything I said, but I did not like O'Shea Brissett on that slate at all. And then when he was starting, I was like, oh, okay, I want to get to some Brissett, but then the game had already locked, so I couldn't switch to him anyway. So it was like, all right, what am I going to do here?
Yeah, one of the weirdest situations ever, and I'll tell you who did not come through in that spot, Jakar Sampson.
Although he's okay yesterday, which I was kind of happy with.
I don't care about Sunday. I don't play him. I don't want nothing to do with him. So whatever he did, I only remember the Saturday. But we appreciate you guys for watching. Follow at Ehrenberg Dfs. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Shout out to our producer, Tyler, keeping us on track as always. We appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys again soon. And subscribe to the channel so you can see all the content coming out here all day long. Bye, guys.